In 1965, Andrew Oldham, the flamboyant and ambitious manager of the Rolling Stones, decided to shake up the music industry. With the help of Tony Calder, he launched Immediate Records, one of the first truly independent British record labels. Their goal? Give artists creative freedom while capitalizing on the British invasion and mod culture. Immediate's first-run catalog is a time capsule of London's 60s music scene. Part of Oldham's strategy was to give his artists as long as they needed to make their record, which was a welcome break from pop's high-pressure industry, which eventually burned out most musicians.
I promote talent. I take something and sort of put it into a shape. I just try and make something presentable to the public, make it commercial. Anything that has some form of an image to it, I get involved in.
8 blocks of hash.
I'm a terrible user and a thief, you know. I mean, I'm not original. Every record is, oh yeah, let's steal a bit out of that.
Immediate quickly gained some of the most exciting musicians of the era. Chris Farlowe joined Immediate Records in 1965 and became one of the label's most successful artists, scoring a UK #1 hit in 1966 with Out of Time, a song written by the Rolling Stones' Mick Jagger and Keith Richards. His powerful, soulful voice set him apart in the British R&B scene, and his association with Immediate allowed him to work closely with Jagger, who produced Out of Time, along with several other tracks on Farlowe's album, The Art of Chris Farlowe, in 1966. Unlike the Rolling Stones' own version, Farlowe's take on Out of Time featured a lush orchestral arrangement, giving it a more dramatic and polished sound that resonated with UK audiences. His tenure at Immediate also saw him cover other Jagger-Richards compositions, such as Paint It Black, further cementing his place with the label's roster of blues-inspired rock artists. Farlowe's success was a key moment for Immediate Records, demonstrating the label's ability to produce a major chart hit while maintaining its reputation for artistic freedom. One of the most significant yet initially overlooked releases in Immediate Records' early days was Nico's rendition of Gordon Lightfoot's I'm Not Sayin'. Already a well-known model in Europe, Nico was introduced to Andrew Oldham through her connection with Brian Jones of the Rolling Stones. Session musician Jimmy Page contributed 12-string guitar, and he also wrote and handled production on the B-side, The Last Mile. The release also accompanied by a striking promotional film at West India Docks, adding a visual dimension to Nico's haunting presence. Though it failed to gain much attention at the time, the single now stands as an intriguing early chapter in both Immediate's history and Nico's later avant-garde career with the Velvet Underground. Despite Immediate Records' promising future, its newly signed artists were unaware that Andrew Oldham had already passed his peak and was on the brink of a rapid decline. Struggling with depression and panic attacks, exasperated by his growing distance from the increasingly independent Rolling Stones, Oldham developed a substance habit and eventually underwent electroconvulsive therapy in an attempt to regain control. Tensions with the Stones had been brewing, and particularly over his production work on Between the Buttons, which the band felt was unsatisfactory. His difficulties in adapting to their psychedelic experimentation further strained the relationship, culminating in his detachment from the sessions for their Satanic Majesty's request. As Oldham's influence waned, Immediate Records would soon face its own struggles, mirroring its founder's downward spiral. After the Ike and Tina Turner Revue opened for the Rolling Stones on a UK tour, Andrew Oldham offered Pat "P.P." Arnold, a member of the Ikettes, a solo deal with Immediate Records. In early 1967, Mick Jagger attempted to pair her with Rod Stewart for a duet on a Wilson Pickett song. But a dispute over studio costs erupted, leading Jagger to distance himself from Immediate. Oldham had brought in Alan Klein, a savvy New York hustler, to replace Easton as his business manager. On Oldham's behalf, Klein renegotiated the Rolling Stones' contract with Decca. Then in 1967, when Mick Jagger and Keith Richards were arrested, Oldham fled to the U.S., fearing he was next. He appointed Klein to manage things in his absence. Eventually, when Oldham was forced to step down as the Rolling Stones manager, he sold Klein the rights to the band's music. a decision that would haunt the Stones and many other musicians for years to come. This move was immortalized in the bootleg track Effing Andrew, a response to Oldham's controversial actions. Despite their enormous commercial success, it's reported that Small Faces manager Don Arden, father of Sharon Osbourne, paid the band just £20 a week, around $50 at that time, plus a clothing allowance. In the midst of these shifts, Oldham allegedly handed £25,000 to Don Arden in a brown paper bag, solidifying the bass's position on Immediate Records.
Andrew Oldham had recently lost the Rolling Stones, so I guess he was anxious to get a big-name group, and the Small Faces were generally known as being one of the top 4 groups in the country at that time.
Big mistake. We signed that contract with him over, rule 1. I think it's rule 3 in show business, sign when you're sober. So I didn't like him from the start. He was a creep.
Should we say 5% of the people who are in the music business are in it for the right reason? Money. They should be in it for money.
Their signing helped establish Immediate Records as a major force in the British music scene.
They all come out to groove about, be nice and have fun and listen.
Small Faces' iconic Itchy-Coo Park continued their journey through lysergic soundscapes.
Itchy-Coo Park is Manor Park, and there was a part of it where young people used to go and canoodle, and when they did, they would get stung by the nettles that were there, so that they would itch a lot. So it became known locally as Itchy-Coo Park.
Steve Marriott and Ronnie Lane crafted the song, with Lane borrowing the melody from the hymn God Be in My Head, before Marriott transformed it into a quintessential summer anthem with its infectious, "It's All Too Beautiful" refrain.
I tell you what I'll do, what will you? I'd like.
The band further solidified their success with Tin Soldier, a song originally written for P.P. Arnold, but turned into a standout by Marriott's powerful delivery.
I am a little tin soldier that wants to jump into your fire.
Despite these triumphs, Small Faces, like their label Immediate Records and their contemporaries, were grappling with how to carve their own niche amongst the rising influence of the exotic psychedelic sounds of Jimi Hendrix, Pink Floyd, and most notably the Beatles' album Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. The Nice, featuring Keith Emerson, joined Immediate Records in 1967 and played a crucial role in pioneering progressive rock with their dynamic fusion of classical music, jazz, and psychedelic rock. Their theatrical and explosive live performances often featured Emerson stabbing his Hammond organ with knives or setting it on fire, became legendary, and set the stage for the bombastic style. The Nice appeared on the famous '67 package tour with Hendrix and Pink Floyd and released a debut album, The Thoughts of Emerlis Dave Jacques, on Immediate later that year. The Nice were returning from a gig on the Isle of Wight. Emerson says, "We were on the ferry and news was coming in that Bobby Kennedy had been shot. We'd seen John Kennedy and Martin Luther King go, and now it's Bobby." The Nice had already been rehearsing America, and I thought, what if we put Dave Jacques' first impression of America with Bernstein's? We wanted to make the first protest instrumental. Emerson says, Andrew Oldham came in and in the opening proceeded to run around the studio screaming manically, shooting the starting pistol he had come armed with. That's all the screaming and the gunshots. I was a bit upset about the mix after we recorded that. We were driving to a gig with Radio Luxembourg on, and suddenly America comes on. I'm like, hang on, we were going to mix this. But Oldham had stayed behind, mixed it, and got it out straight away. I was upset with him. In retrospect, what he did was the best thing. Oldham encouraged Emerson to burn a U.S. flag at the Royal Albert Hall, sealing the band's notoriety. The Nice's forging of classical themes and bombastic covers further flared on their second album. Their debut album is often considered one of the earliest progressive rock albums. The Nice's fusion of classical themes and rock instrumentation was a direct precursor to Emerson's later work and Emerson, Lake and Palmer, which would take progressive rock to stadium-level popularity in the 1970s.
I'm going back, to be young again. I think of lying in bed.
While Immediate was an artistic success, behind the scenes, financial mismanagement was a brewing disaster. Oldham and Calder were brilliant marketers but terrible accountants. Money flowed freely, but little was allocated to paying the artists. Contracts were either poorly written or non-existent, leaving musicians vulnerable. By 1968, the Small Faces had become frustrated with their lack of earnings, despite selling records. Steve Marriott started voicing his anger publicly, but Immediate kept operating on borrowed time. The triumph of Itchy-Coo Park quickly lost its luster as the Small Faces discovered they were owed back royalties, straining their relationship with Immediate Records. Struggling financially, the band sought another advance when their record contract came up for renewal, only to find that Oldham was now paying off whatever debts Don Arden claimed he was owed. It later was alleged that the royalties had been funneled into an offshore account, leaving the band with little to show for their work. By 1969, it became clear that the Small Faces were unlikely to receive any income from Immediate, deepening the rift with the band. Adding to the tension was Steve Marriott's growing friendship with Peter Frampton, dubbed the Face of 68, who had recently left the Herd and was forming a new band with drummer Jerry Shirley. Marriott, eager for a fresh start, joined the project, and with the addition of Greg Ridley, Humble Pie was born. Humble Pie joined Immediate Records in 1969, bringing together an all-star lineup of British rock musicians: Steve Marriott, Peter Frampton, Greg Ridley, and Jerry Shirley. Their signing was a major coup for Immediate Records. Humble Pie developed their signature blend of hard rock, blues, and acoustic folk, a sound that would later influence many classic rock and heavy metal acts. Their debut album was well received, with critics noting its progressive approach to blues-based rock. Their second album, Town and Country, in 1969, leaned even further into folk and acoustic elements, furthering a more subdued and introspective sound. Their album was rush-released in the UK in November 1969, while Immediate Records were on the verge of financial collapse. The band was away on its first tour of the US. Other one-off releases on Immediate Records included Rod Stewart's Little Misunderstood and Fleetwood Mac's Man of the World. For 5 years, Immediate poured out a relentless stream of high-quality, boundary-pushing music, embracing the eclectic mix of styles that was nothing short of revolutionary. Its success was a reflection of both the electric atmosphere of London's music scene and the relentless ambition of Oldham and Calder, a visionary duo whose label, though short-lived, left an enduring impact. By 1969, Immediate was running on fumes. Artists like the Small Faces and the Nice demanded payments, only to find out there was no money left. By 1970, Immediate declared bankruptcy. The label's assets, including master recordings, were seized and became tangled in legal disputes. The dream was over. Warner Brothers' newly established UK arm took over the offices. Oldham's approach to business was largely based on style over substance. He made sure his artists looked successful, but behind the scenes, money was often mismanaged. By the time the label collapsed in 1970, most of the artists had not received full compensation for their work. Some of the musicians went on to legendary careers at other labels, while some struggled to ever recapture what they had created at Immediate. With no money to show for creating some of the most legendary music of the 60s, some fell into despair.
We never made any money from Immediate Records. I don't know who did.
Ronnie Lane now is in a wheelchair and he's suffering from multiple sclerosis. And he's in bad shape, really. I mean, he just cannot get out, and we all try and look after him as best we can. It costs a great deal of money to get him to his isolation chambers. What I'm saying is, if he would have had that money coming in as a regular income, like the past royalties, it would have made life that much more easier for him. And that's what upsets me to this day, watching other people get rich on the fruits of our endeavours, you know. But that will change shortly.
In April 1991, Steve Marriott died in his sleep when a fire caused by a cigarette swept through his home in Essex. His death came just a few days after he had begun work on a new album in the United States with his former Humble Pie bandmate Peter Frampton. Ian McLagan later estimated that the Small Faces lost around £1 million in unpaid royalties and mismanaged finances. Yet in their prime, the band had been outfitted with unlimited charge accounts at John Stephen and other Carnaby Street boutiques, given the illusion of wealth and success. It was a perfect reflection of Andrew Oldham's philosophy: project the image of being worth $1 million even if there's nothing in the bank. The Small Faces Ian McLagan tells Uncut in 2014, "We got our very first royalty check from the sales of our Decca records in 1997. So Steve Marriott, who died in 1991, never got a penny. Manager Don Arden never paid us," McLagan says. "We got £20 a week and that was it. We went to Immediate and now we were on £50 a week. And that was all we got from them too. Unbelievable. I don't think any band's been treated worse than the Small Faces." According to Small Faces drummer Kenny Jones, most of Immediate Records' assets and income were embezzled by one of the company's senior partners, who had allegedly channeled the funds to offshore bank accounts. Kenny Jones told The Telegraph in 2019, when asked, "Did the Small Faces not get a fair share of their earnings?" "No, we got screwed all the way down the line. The royalty rate was 1.5 pence. I renegotiated it almost 20 years ago and managed to get it to 15 pence. None of us in the Small Faces were interested in money. All we wanted to do was record. We made it pretty quickly and that's why we ended up getting screwed." When asked what's been your most lucrative work, he replies, "Making the Small Faces album Ogden's Nut Gone Flake in 1968, although the full payoff is still to come. I never know what an individual album makes financially. You have to look at the entire catalog. All the records kick over all the time, but no single one is going to be retirement money." Kenny later spoke of the record, "Ogden is so different to anything we had done before. I was incredibly proud of it and still am. And it continues to be appreciated. We have so many young fans now as it has been passed down through the generations." For the last 20 odd years, Kenny has been instrumental in chasing down rights and lost royalties. He says, "BMG have got it now and they bought Sanctuary and Immediate, so it's all under one roof, including Charlie Records. It makes it a lot easier. I renegotiated a deal a long time ago, so I started to get everyone a little bit more money, not like the old days when we got totally ripped off. It's something I've been doing for years. The others got fed up with it. Ronnie was living in America, and then so was Mac, so it was left to me to take care of all the business stuff. So I've been doing it for a lot longer than people realize. I'm going for the publishing next. I'm going for the jugular, so EMI better cough up." Other musicians, including P.P. Arnold, Chris Farlowe, and Humble Pie, also struggled with payments. P.P. Arnold states, "Shortly after I signed to Immediate, the Stones split with Andrew, but Mick advised me to stay on. I had 2 chart hits. The first cut is The Deepest, which made it into the UK Top 20 in 1967, and Angel in the Morning in 1968, but I never earned royalties because Immediate went bankrupt in 1970. Andrew Oldham said of his time as the Rolling Stones manager, "Back then you were dealing with magic, now you're dealing with the reality of bean counting. The Stones and I gave each other confidence. A lot of it had to do with being the same age, same lack of experience, and same passion for life. In many ways, I managed them less than I inspired them to become what they became." In 1972, Oldham reflected on his departure from the music industry, telling Disc and Music Echo, "I just lost interest because it became like a business." Over the next 25 years, he battled a substance habit and mental instability, eventually living in Bogota, Colombia. Immediate Records' collapse mirrored Oldham's own downfall, yet despite its chaotic trajectory, Immediate left a lasting mark on British music, bridging the gap from the blues and mod movements of 1965 through psychedelia and into the realm of modern rock and prog. Ronnie Lane was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis in 1977. Jimmy Page, Rod Stewart, and Ronnie Wood generously continued to donate money for Ronnie's medical care. There were yet no royalties from the Small Faces' work. Lane's health deteriorated, and he died in 1997 at the age of 51. This case became an early example of how vulnerable artists, just looking for their big break, are targets by the greedy or incompetent. Immediate Records, while freeing these artists, also left them vulnerable to financial disaster. Records stands as a cautionary tale. In the music industry, creative freedom means little without financial accountability.
We touched it.